Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to talk about a good bit of Timberwolves news from the weekend. Karl-Anthony Towns medical procedures, a front office hire, and more. I also want to talk about Chris Finch and the performance. Last week we talked about how he was shortchanged in the Coach of the Year voting. We'll talk a little bit more about that here today and everything he did for the Wolves defense this year, especially. That's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. And of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the aforementioned Locked On Podcast Network. Today, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's show, Sakara Nutrition. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish. Go to sakara.com/lockedon20 or enter code LOCKDOWN20 for 20% off at checkout. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. First of all, off the top here, big thank you if you are making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. And a reminder that we're free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, and of course, the all-new Odyssey app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, today I have quite a bit I want to get to. First, if you missed Friday's show, be sure to go back and listen to it. Myself and Chilango Langason from Zone Coverage in the Twin Cities, as well as the C&D NBA podcast, reviewed D'Angelo Russell's season. We both have pretty pointed opinions on D'Lo, and I think we found some nuance there because I think D'Angelo Russell as a whole, I guess like almost anything else, is a really polarizing subject. There seem to be a lot of D'Lo stands. There seem to be a lot of people who think he's awful. And of course, the true answer is somewhere in the middle. We talk about that on Friday's show. So be sure to go back and listen to that. The impact we felt like he had on the season, his potential role or potential trade value here moving forward on the Timberwolves roster. So that was all from Friday. Be sure to go and listen. That's the episode right before this one. Again, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And of course, that includes YouTube as well. So be sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, all that good stuff as well. All right, today on the show, I want to start with a few news and notes here off the top, and then get into the Chris Finch conversation. There was a fantastic article by Britt Robson over at minpost.com, and he talked a little bit about, he talked about the four people. The title of the article is 4 people most responsible for making the Timberwolves season such an enjoyable ride. And one of the people he spends the most amount of time on was Chris Finch. And last week with Coach of the Year voting, I talked a little bit about how I think he was robbed. He finished 8th in Coach of the Year voting, tied for 8th, and he should have been much higher. And I gave some reasons for that last week, but I think Britt's piece brought up some good specific points related to the defense. So I want to get into that here later in the show. First, though, a little bit of Timberwolves news. First, this broke on Sunday. Ramona Shelburne at ESPN reported that Karl-Anthony Towns underwent stem cell treatment and platelet-rich plasma injections in both knees, his left ankle, left wrist, and right ring finger on Friday. It's a little bit of a surprising report. Everybody knows that Towns has been playing banged up. He hadn't really missed any games until the season that was ultimately shortened by COVID. He had, I guess, the season before, which was the 2018-19 season. He missed his first couple games in his career after he was in a car accident, and they were being cautious with him, obviously. Then the year that was ultimately shortened by COVID, he had the knee. I think he had something else that year as well. And then last year, and of course, he actually had COVID-19. Then this last year, besides COVID-19, we knew he had the knee issue that caused him to miss some time. We knew at some point the wrist injury, of course, was the first injury, I should say, 2 years ago, and then came up again last year. At one point, there was some talk about a finger. I didn't know there was an ankle issue. I didn't know it was both knees. I thought it was just the left knee. But according to this report from ESPN, he had pain in both knees, especially his right knee, which he had the sleeve on during the playoffs. He had a cyst in his left ankle, a subluxated left wrist with ligament damage, which we did know about. That, of course, is what he missed time with initially, the left wrist that he had surgery on a couple of years ago. And remember, the report was the subluxation of the wrist, which is essentially the really bad sprain, if I remember right, with the ligament damage. And then the aggravated joint on the middle finger of his right shooting hand. So all of those things together, he had stem cell treatment and platelet-rich plasma injections, which was done to try and avoid surgery and recover fully by training camp. Now, That's always a little bit scary when the alternate uh, treatment is picked in order to avoid surgery. I'm not going to pretend to know near as much. I don't know anything in the realm of what obviously these medical professionals do. So I'm not going to sit here and criticize that decision. But I do know that as a baseball fan, anytime you see this with somebody who's got like arm issues and avoids Tommy John surgery, they end up having the surgery eventually anyways. This is obviously different. This is a series of small, maladies that Towns has. I shouldn't say small, but grand scheme of things, right? I mean, obviously nothing was he didn't have to have surgery for anything. The wrist and the knee obviously sound pretty problematic. The cyst in the ankle, and the finger issue, those are things that hopefully can be healed with rest and treatment. That's obviously the goal here. But it's a little worrisome. Certainly that all these things could crop up again, but it also underscores how tough Karl-Anthony Towns is. I don't think he gets enough credit for his toughness and what he's played through, how often he falls and crashes to the floor, which is also something he's got to continue to work on. But he plays hard, and he's going to have these issues, and yet he's played through them. And these are the types of things, later in a career they add up. But right now he's still not quite yet to his prime seasons, hopefully. And to show that he played as well as he did through these injuries is really, really amazing. So kudos to Towns, and hopefully that this treatment works out. Again, that reporting is from Ramona Shelburne initially at ESPN. A couple of other quick notes. Another just kind of fun note on the player side, Jordan McLaughlin received his master's degree from USC. Remember, he was a 4-year starter there at USC, went undrafted, played a year in the G League before coming to Minnesota, and then played 2 years on two-way deals. But he played those 4 years at USC and has now gotten his master's. So congrats to J-Mac. And then the last thing from John Krasinski at The Athletic, this was late last week, I believe on Thursday, actually. John reported that the Timberwolves are hiring Steve Sr. from Memphis to become a new assistant general manager. They did not pick up the contract option from Gianluca Pascucci, who was initially added from Brooklyn back under Gerson Rosas, and they did not bring him back. They instead have hired Senior, according to John Krasinski, to become a new assistant general manager focused on player development. He worked previously with Sachin Gupta and Chris Finch in Houston, Pablo Prigioni with the Knicks, and several other Wolves coaches and staffers. Well thought of for his work. This again from John on Twitter. Well thought of for his work with the Grizzlies staff that was just recognized with Zach Kleinman, being named exec of the year. Of course, Kleinman becoming the youngest executive to win that award this year there with the Grizzlies. So another front office addition, another person who has familiarity. Of course, Sachin Gupta and Chris Finch worked together in Houston. They go way back. No doubt they've got similar taste, I guess, or certainly have a Venn diagram of guys that have worked with both of them at some point in their respective careers. So there's another front office move for the Wolves. All right, I want to talk about Chris Finch actually next. I want to spend basically the rest of the show talking about him, and then we'll continue the player review series. Of course, we talked D'Lo Friday. That means Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns are the final two players to discuss in the review. We'll pick that back up on Tuesday's show. But today, again, I want to spend some time talking about Chris Finch. Before we do that, let's talk about our new friends over at Sakara Nutrition. Feeling your best starts with what you eat. Sakara helps you live a healthy, balanced lifestyle and truly enjoy it with delicious, plant-rich, transformational nutrition that builds a foundation for living in your best body. Now is the time to seek wellness, joy, and abundance in all areas of your life, starting with what you eat. With Sakara, you get nutrient-dense meals, snacks, and supplements that nourish your body without ever sacrificing taste or quality. Sakara is a wellness company anchored in food as medicine on a mission to nourish your body through the power of plants. Sakara gives you the tools you need to transform your life with their organic, ready-to-eat meal delivery program and functional wellness essentials. Their nutritionally designed, chef-crafted breakfasts, lunches, and dinners are made with powerful plant-rich ingredients, helping boost your energy, support your digestion, curb your sugar cravings, and get your skin glowing. Plus, it's all delivered right to your door, ready to eat. Sakara's functional, plant-rich wellness essentials help you create a body you love living in, from their best-selling Metabolism Super Powder to the Foundation. Their daily supplement packs, Sakara's products are designed to support your wellness goals anytime, anywhere. And right now, Sakara is offering our listeners 20% off their first order when they go to sakara.com/lockdown20 or enter the code lockdown20 at checkout. Again, that's Sakara, sakara.com/lockdown20 to get 20% off your first order. Sakara.com/lockdown20. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Make sure that you go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock drafts, player rankings, and of course, Big Boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. And Timberwolves fans, now's the time. The Wolves have one first-round pick and, of course, 19th in the first round, and then they have 3 second-rounders. There was actually a report by Darren Wolfson, Doogie, in the Twin Cities that the Timberwolves worked out several guys who are probably second-round undrafted type prospects. So those reports are going to start to pour in, and of course, we're going to flip to basically full-time draft coverage here. We're roughly a month away. We've started on the Locked On NBA Network. We've started mock drafts for the lottery, so you can go through and listen to essentially crossover episodes where we have multiple hosts talking about who their teams will draft to put together a mock draft of the lottery. Once the whole draft is set, as we lead in, we'll do that. We'll do our big, mock draft leading into it. We'll do live coverage the night of the draft. So all that stuff is upcoming here on the Locked On NBA Network. All right, let's talk Chris Finch. So I talked a little bit about Finch last week, Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, when the Coach of the Year voting came out. I think it might have been Wednesday's show. And Finch ended up tied for 8th. He received a couple of third place votes. That was it. Too low. Too low in the rankings. I would have put him 3rd or 4th overall. Obviously, there's some guys that had to be ahead of him. I think he was in the conversation with like Udoka with Boston and some of those guys where he probably could have, he should have been ahead of Spoelstra. You could argue ahead of Nick Nurse, some of that in terms of what he was given this year and the fact that the roster stayed largely the same. And he took the top 12 rotation guys. 10 of them were on the team last year that he took over midseason with the training camp, with an offseason, hiring some of his own guys on his staff and working with the front office that obviously didn't necessarily choose him. Gupta was on the staff that chose him, but Gerson Rosas wasn't around anymore. With all that turmoil, Finch turning around 10 of the 12 same guys to become that much better this season. Yes, there were other factors. The team was a lot healthier this year, and there was some obviously natural progression, but you have to credit the coaching staff on some level for that anyway. For all those reasons, I think it was kind of insane that and defeating, or overcoming, I should say, their Vegas over-under by, depending on where you're looking, 10.5 to 12.5 wins. BetOnline.net, I believe it was 10.5 wins over where they were supposed to be, according to BetOnline. All those things. And also as a 7 seed, taking the 2 seed to the 6th game and arguably outplaying them in more quarters, right? It was a couple other than game 2. The Wolves were very competitive in that series. So for a lot of reasons, Finch should have gotten more votes for Coach of the Year. I think this article by Britt Robson over at mintpost.com, and of course, Britt does a fantastic job, was really good at talking about Chris Finch's impact on the Timberwolves defense. And of course, his background is as an offensive guru, which is the term that Britt uses, but it's absolutely accurate. Of course, he was partly the architect of the Denver Nuggets offense that they still run, with Nikola Jokic as kind of the fulcrum in their half-court offense. And he was in New Orleans when they saw some success, albeit brief, due to injuries to Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins. That dual big offense on Alvin Gentry's staff down in New Orleans several years ago. And then, of course, was on Nick Nurse's staff in Toronto for a brief period of time. But everywhere he's gone, and he was in Houston way back when Houston was quite good. He's been a big part of the offense in all of those places, was essentially the associate head coach and the offensive coordinator in Denver and New Orleans for a stretch, and was known as kind of this, is he going to use Towns like Jokic? Is he going to try dual bigs, which he hasn't really done? Is he, all these different things? What are they going to run? A lot of horn stuff, a lot of mid post stuff, type of stuff. Again, similar to what Denver does, or with bigs that stretch the floor even better than Jokic, like what he did in New Orleans in terms of Towns and Naz Reid. And the answer is yes. The offense is far more dynamic this year. I talked about this on Friday with Chilenga on the show when we talked about D'Angelo Russell and the way the Wolves have used him. The Wolves just don't run as much straight pick and roll as they did under Ryan Saunders. The offense is at the same time less complex, but more creative, if that makes any sense, right? So under Ryan Saunders, Ryan had a similar playbook to his dad, to Flip, right? Where there were all these different play calls and lots of minutia and these complicated sets that they were running with all these different options, and it required the play call from the coach to the point guard to really kind of initiate the offense. It's one of the reasons Ricky Rubio made a lot of sense, is he was good at that sort of thing. It's why, Flip wanted a floor general like a Tyus Jones, right? When he was running that front office. It's a little bit different. But Ryan also ran a lot of pick and rolls. A lot of it was out of, pick and rolls out of these sets. A lot of just a lot of kind of micromanagement, but ultimately you're running pick and rolls, or that was part of the contention between Ryan Saunders and D'Angelo Russell is late game situation. It was just D'Lo, I'm going to run a pick and roll, see what happens. And Ryan wanted to call some of these more in the weeds plays. Now with Chris Finch, he's much more of a laissez-faire, like I'm going to let you guys free flow, play, make the right pass, play fast. Don't second guess yourself, just play. At the same time, when he calls sets, they're more creative and they're more, I think, tailored to the skill sets of the players on the team. I think one of Ryan Saunders' weaknesses was for as dynamic's not the right word, for as diverse as the playbook could be, a lot of times it was just, hey, these are the plays we're going to run them. And it wasn't necessarily specific to the personnel on the court. I think Chris Finch is really, really good at calling the right plays in the right situation. I actually think Saunders was good at ATOs, at calling plays out of timeouts and sideline out of bounds plays. I think that Finch is good at that as well, but we see the Wolves do more of the mid-post stuff. We see them do more of the horn sets. We see more double drag action. We see pin downs and curl screens for Karl-Anthony Towns to get open and shoot jumpers. Same thing for Malik Beasley. I think there's more creativity there, and it fits the skill set of the players on the team more than what we saw Saunders do. Still, I think that the thing that's most important to focus on right now is the defense, because that was completely unexpected. Of course, David Vanterpool was the defensive coordinator for several years for Minnesota. He left in the offseason after getting passed over for the head coaching job in Minnesota when Finch was hired midseason off the Toronto bench. Vanterpool had ran the defense in Portland. When he came to Minnesota, it was like, hey, he found a way to have a good defense with two negative defensive players in Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum in Portland. He can come here to Minnesota, do the same thing with the Timberwolves, and take a team with some poor defensive players, frankly, and turn them into a good defensive team. Well, unfortunately, the drop coverage that they ran almost exclusively under Vanterpool as defensive coordinator did not match well with Towns' skill set, right? Towns is indecisive. He is good laterally in terms of quickness as far as big men go, but backpedaling, getting on his heels, he wouldn't get up far enough. He dropped too far. If he came up too far, he would reach and he'd get in foul trouble. And it was trying to find that balance. I always go back to the D'Angelo Russell when he played for the Warriors. He dropped 50 plus against the Wolves. Half of it seemed like, was on mid-range jumpers, elbow jumpers against Minnesota early in that 18-19 season. 18-19? Early in the 19-20 season. He was traded to Minnesota in February of 20. That sort of thing. Kyrie Irving did it to the Wolves. Multiple, tons of these guards that are high usage guards, very comfortable shooting in the mid range, killed the Timberwolves drop coverage. Towns was not a good match for that. Chris Finch came into town and said, hey, I'm going to install something that makes sense for the personnel I have, which is similar to what he did on offense. And I know it sounds like a novel idea. It's really kind of amazing when you think about it, that as a coaching staff, the previous Wolves regime, and you could go back to Tom Thibodeau occasionally doing this too. It's just that, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting it to work when it's not working. And that's kind of what the last couple of coaching staffs did. Now, obviously Tibbs had more success. He also had Jimmy Butler for much of his time in Minnesota. But this coaching staff, Chris Finch on down the bench, seems to be much more in tune with what their guys are good at and what the scheme should be. So I want to talk a little bit more about the defensive scheme that has worked really well for Minnesota here in just a minute. First, though, let's talk about our friends over at Built Bar. Imagine dipping your finger into that plastic tub of birthday cake frosting and then opening your eyes and realizing that it was only 150 calories and 16 grams of protein. That's what it's like to eat a birthday cake puff from Built. I actually just received my birthday cake puffs from Built this weekend, and I have never had anything like them before. They're absolutely delicious. They're available right now. Can't promise they'll be there tomorrow, though. So go get them today at Built.com. If you haven't tried puffs, I'll let you in on the secret. Because, of course, that's what friends do. And you listen to the show, you're a friend. A chocolate-covered marshmallow protein bar is what a puff is. I know it sounds crazy, but they're delicious. They're marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. You can make every day your birthday with Built's birthday cake puffs. 150 calories, 16 grams of protein, and only 9 grams of sugar. This limited time flavor is an amazing option if you're looking for a healthy way to get flavor and variety in your day. All Built puffs are covered in 100% real chocolate. That means with Built, you can get healthy and actually enjoy eating healthy the entire time. They're made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. Go to Built.com to get birthday cake puffs now. Built.com, promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCKed15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right. Wrapping up the Chris Finch conversation again, talking specifically about defense. I've spent a lot of time on this year, but I think it's really important to underscore just what it was that Finch did that was so impressive. Switching from the drop coverage to more of an aggressive high wall pick and roll scheme. And I, early in the year, I really termed it more, I think it was more of a consistent blitz that the Wolves put on ball handlers. They identified that D'Angelo Russell obviously was not good at fighting through screens. He could get beat on the dribble fairly easily. Towns was not good in drop coverage. And Finch, I thought this is really interesting. This is a quote that Robson used in his article at minpost.com. Uh, it sounds like Joseph Blair, who was supposed to be the defensive coordinator, but you may recall was supposed to be the head coach of the summer league team, left the day that he was supposed to start coaching to go to the Wizards as one of their lead assistants. He was wanting to run more of a switching scheme. Finch said, this is a quote from Robson's article. Finch said, quote, "It drives accountability if you don't switch. If your job is to do something, then we can decide if you are doing it well enough." End quote. That's a fantastic way to look at this, because if you're switching, you could assign some blame to different people, right? Like, hey, you didn't call out the switch soon enough. Yeah, you could point fingers a lot easier. So and so didn't step up, whatever. But if you say, hey, this is your man, this is a high wall scheme, you stick to your man, you guard this person, we force the ball to the ball handler's hands, then the accountability falls on the low man, and it's clear who that is, right? Everybody has a very specific job in the Timberwolves high wall scheme, trying to essentially trap the ball, rotate on the back end of the defense to recover. And the Wolves did a really good job of that early in the season. The problem, and it helped generate a high turnover rate, which helped buoy the Timberwolves offense, which really struggled in the half court, especially early in the season. Timberwolves offense was not efficient, but when they got out in transition, they got open threes, they got dunks, they got layups. They were much better in the open floor. And that was spurred on by forcing turnovers. That was one benefit of this scramble kind of high wall defense the Wolves played early in, well, for much of the season, but almost exclusively in October, November, December, really up until COVID started ravaging the team in late December. The Wolves almost exclusively played high wall blitzing pick and roll coverage. The one detriment, other than the fact that it's really hard to play it for 48 minutes, 82 times a year, because you're going to get tired and banged up and you just don't have enough athletes in length. No team would, right? Is the propensity to foul. Now that's exacerbated by the fact that Towns clearly has issues fouling. Jaden McDaniels has issues fouling. Jared Vanderbilt at times does, although not as bad as the other two. All those guys are already high foul rate guys. It's an issue when you're asking them to rush and recover, contest, to recover and contest, to be able to close out under control and still be able to guard the drive, to play up as the low man, to even have guys like Malik Beasley and D'Angelo Russell who are a little bit more diminutive, try and hide them on the backside, but they've got to come up and help protect the paint as much as possible as your last line of defense. Some of those things are a little bit trickier, and the high foul rate persisted throughout the year for the Wolves, no question. And that's something that's got to be cleaned up a little bit. Part of that is some of these guys are just always going to be high foul rate guys, but they still have to learn to improve in that regard. So that was one of the drawbacks to this scheme. But by and large, the Timberwolves won that trade-off. I remember doing a show back in November, roughly a month into the season, and I was saying, hey, the Wolves have one of the league's top 10 defenses. I don't know if this is sustainable because of the poor defensive rebound rate, the high foul rate, and the high turnover rate. Is this all going to stay the same? The answer is yes. I mean, the defense regressed a little. It became more of a, would they finish 12th or 13th in efficiency, to maybe 14th in defensive efficiency league wide. They sank back a little bit to the pack, but they also improved their defensive rebounding slightly. And their turnover rate came back to earth a little bit as well. They maintained that high foul rate. But this weird kind of blueprint of a defense, weird profile of a defense with with lots of fouls, poor defensive rebounding, and allowing a high offensive rebound rate, a mediocre 3-point defense, and then the high turnover rate. This weird profile of a defense actually worked. And again, it helped buoy the offensive attack. The Timberwolves looked at their personnel. Chris Finch and his staff looked at the personnel and said, hey, we have rangy bigs like Karl-Anthony Towns, Jared Vanderbilt, etc., who can guard multiple positions on the perimeter and will be better there than having to be indecisive, asking them to make a decision in the moment on playing up, playing back, etc. in this drop coverage. We're also going to hold them accountable by not switching that often. Now, as the year went on, they played more, they switched more, they played less zone. They tried to mix things up a little bit. But primarily, this remained a high wall blitzing defense, and it fit the personnel better. It helped hide D'Angelo Russell because of the addition of Patrick Beverley. And it worked really, really well. So I'm really curious to see if over the course of the offseason, I don't think the personnel on the roster is going to shift dramatically. I mean, very likely the Wolves will add the 19th pick in the draft to the roster. Perhaps Bolmaro gets more action next year. Taurean Prince could move on as a free agent. Jake Layman will move on. Not that he was in the rotation. Josh Okogie could move on. Okogie could move on. There's going to be some movement on the fringes. I don't anticipate a ton of moves this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see if, given this additional time, if the Wolves front office, or really, I guess more the coaching staff, looks at the situation and says, hey, we need to introduce a different defense that we can go to that's going to be successful. So we're not asking these guys to blitz on the perimeter, 48 minutes a game, however many possessions per game, and wear out our battered, even though Anthony Edwards is 20, I mean, he's got the knees and the ankles and everything, and Karl-Anthony Towns has all these injuries, and D'Lo's got the knees. Can we ask these guys to play this type of a defense, or can we play something else? Can we switch more often? Can we try some drop and zone and mix it up a little bit and be a little bit more creative, and then play that high wall defense when we really need it? Be prepared to play this defense. Now, of course, well-tuned offenses and well-coached teams were able to beat that high wall pick and roll coverage by essentially skip passes, backdoor cuts, being disciplined and not throwing the pick, right? Because Anthony Edwards essentially played free safety. D'Angelo Russell did a little bit of that at times too when he was off the ball. And the Wolves picked off passes and took them the other way for the, a fast break dunk, the equivalent of a pick six in football. The Wolves got less of that against those good, well-coached teams, which is what you face in the playoffs. And now Memphis played into the Wolves' hands in some cases in these games. Obviously, the Wolves still lost the series, but Golden State's not going to fall for that, right? The well-coached teams are not going to fall for that. Not to say Taylor Jenkins isn't a good coach. That's not all what I'm saying. I'm saying the well-coached, disciplined, experienced players as well aren't going to fall into those traps. The Spoelstra teams, the Nick Nurse teams, the Doc Rivers teams, by and large, things like that, or teams like that aren't going to fall into these traps. So the Wolves need to diversify the defense a little. But again, I'm now nitpicking beyond what was so impressive this year, which was taking the Wolves from a bottom 5 defense consistently. They'd been bottom 10, I think 12 out of the last 14 years is what I'd counted up the other day. And they took them to a top 15, at times top 10, and often top 12 defense league wide. What can this coaching staff do with this roster next year? Do they find another power forward, somebody who's more versatile and switchable, maybe a younger, more athletic version of Taurean Prince or something like that, someone who can guard the 3 and the 4 that can help Jaden McDaniels and Jared Vanderbilt in that role, being versatile and being switchable and being able to play multiple roles within the Wolves defense. All that to say, Finch had a fantastic year. He did not receive enough credit. Don't listen to the Charles Barkleys of the world, the people who yelled about the Timberwolves coaching being terrible, especially in the playoffs, right? Especially in the playoffs, against these guys. These analysts watch 1, 2, 3 Timberwolves games over the course of the season. Maybe Finch had a fantastic year, deserved the extension he got, should have finished higher than 8th in Coach of the Year. All good coaches make timeout mistakes, substitution mistakes, etc. in the playoffs. That's what happens when you're under a microscope. Chris Finch had a great year. There's no question about it. One of the best coaching seasons in Timberwolves franchise history. All right. Tuesday, we're going to pick back up the player review series. We have Towns, we have Russell to still talk, Towns and Edwards to talk about still this week. Again, if you missed the D'Lo show, that was Friday with Chalanga from Zone Coverage and the CND NBA show. Go back and listen to that. It was a great time talking about D'Angelo Russell. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for listening to Locked On Wolves, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available everywhere, including YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. That's all we have for you today. Thanks again for listening. Of course, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. As long as you're making us your first listen, don't forget about Locked On NBA for your second listen, from the first jump ball of the play-in to the last possession of the finals, which is still roughly a month away. Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis that affect all 30 teams. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.